Today's dedication is for Zahn, who gave me a very generous 1 year's worth of subscriptions on Patreon. Ultima Origin of Oblivion is an awesome new colourless commander, which we don't see that many of. So it's good to see something outside of Eldrazi for this. Whenever it attacks, put a blight counter on a land, which removes all of its land types and abilities and makes it only tap for a colourless. Whenever you tap a land for a colourless, you get an additional mana. One of the rare gods in the game that doesn't get any semblance of indestructible, but I think in colourless we're going to be focused on ramp so much that hopefully that doesn't matter. So speaking of which, we'll go through the ramp first of all, most of which is going to be artifacts, so Everflowing Chalice. Candelabra of Tornos is really good because the lands, all of our lands, are going to tap for 2 mana with our commander in play, which means we get a bunch of free mana to this. Say you tap down 5 lands for 10 mana, use half of that to untap the lands again, tap them all down, you've now got 15 mana. Mana Vault, Soul Ring, pretty obvious stuff. Wayfarer's Bauble, we do have colourless basics now in the form of Wastes, which is actually really thematic for Ultima from Final Fantasy XVI as well. Any of you who know the story know what I'm referring to there, so yeah, we can grab basics in this colourless list as well. Liquid Metal Torque can tap for a colourless, it can turn something into an artifact, ready to have artifact removal placed on it. Mind Stone, Iron Crag we could use to equip to something in the later game, but probably just going to use as a rock. Thought Vessel, no max hand size. Basalt Monolith can combo off for infinite mana. Sword of Feast and Famine can give protection from colours, which can help us get damage through as well as avoid spot removal, but more importantly it can untap all of our lands. Sword of Forging Frontier allows us to get some card advantage and play additional lands. One Power Stone, Hedron Archive, we're getting as many different utility rocks in play as possible. Thran Dynamo, spend 4 mana and get 3 back, is a pretty good return. And with Forsaken Monument, this is whenever you tap any permanent for colourless, you get an additional colourless, so works on your lands but also on your rocks as well. Mightstone and Meekstone, it enters with an ETB where you can either draw 2 cards or give something -5/-5, and then it taps down for 2 mana, which can only be spent on artifacts, of which we've got plenty in the deck. Burnished Heart, again, we're able to fetch basics. Scampering Surveyor and Solemn Simulacrum allow us to do that as well. The Glaring Flesh Raker, whenever we cast a colourless spell, obviously we've got nothing but colourless spells, we'll make a spawn token, so we can use those to chump block, but we can also ramp with them. Conduit of Ruins makes the first creature spell we cast cost 2 less each turn. Ugin the Ineffable, the static ability is going to make our colourless spells cost 2 less as well, which will really mount up. And then with Ugin, Eye of the Storms, which is half the reason that I decided to build this list, because there's a few new colourless payoffs that I've been wanting to play with, and Eye of the Storms is one of them. Can generate mana for you to cast spells into it, and you will want to cast spells into this because the static ability says whenever you cast a colourless spell, exile a permanent with 1 or more colours. So this thing, I imagine, is going to be absolutely insane. So that's the boring mana sorted out, but what do we actually want to do in the deck? Well, we definitely want to be attacking, because Ultima triggers on attacks, and it can switch off Cabal Coffers and Gaia's Cradles and the like. So that means we have a little bit of a Voltron package in the list. Commander's Plate can buff our commander, it is a base 4/4, so this will make it a 7/7, meaning that 3 hits from the commander will deal with someone. Has protection from all colours in a colourless list as well. Lava Spare Boots to give haste and a small buff, as well as a small ward as well. Tarian Soul Cleaver gives vigilance, so we can hold back our commander as a blocker, but it's likely going to get more and more plus counters on it the more artifacts and creatures we see die. Bear in mind that this works on treasure tokens as well, which have become prolific in Magic the Gathering. So for every treasure that gets cracked, we're going to see plus counters on this thing. Mask of Memory, because the downside of colourless decks is that card draw isn't quite the easiest thing to pull off. So when we hit, it's draw 2, discard 1. Thran Power Suit is a better ward of ward 2, and this gets +1/+1 for each equipment attached to it. Mithril Coat to try and keep our Ultima in play, because this is going to give it indestructible. We've already had a look at the 2 swords from the cycle, and there's also Sword of Vengeance for 3 mana, and 3 to equip. It has +2 to power, first strike, vigilance, trample and haste. And we do want to be swinging in as soon as we can. That's why we've got Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves as well. Don't have too many creatures in the list, so hopefully Lightning Greaves won't get stuck on our commander where we're unable to equip anything else thanks to the Shroud. This is my first chance to play the Ether Spark as well. This is why I was referring to us getting a lot of colourless payoffs and me not having all that much chance to play with them. So this is another one of them here. Attach it to a creature you control and put a plus counter on that creature. And then whenever our commander deals combat damage, this gets X number of loyalties per damage dealt. So that means we can more than likely easily get the -5 to draw 2, maybe even the -10 to add 10 mana of any colour. Akroma's Memorial, obviously not an equipment, but it does somewhat go with the Voltron theme. It will give protection from red wraths, as well as red and black spot removal, which we do have to be wary of with our creatures and artifacts. And then on top of that, it's flying, first strike, vigilance, trample and haste. So with those, we should be able to get through some decent damage with our commander. What else do we want to do? Well, I did mention that we want to ramp like crazy. That's why I started with all the ramp spells. So what are we ramping into? Let's just go into some of the big spells here. So we've seen the Eye of the Storms. That is just going to really help us control the board. Ugin is a Wrath as soon as it enters, and it won't touch anything of ours because this cares about coloured permanents. Abstruse Archaic will be able to copy an activated or triggered ability, and that is relevant with Ultima. That means that we're going to be able to put a blight counter on 2 lands, effectively doubling the potency of that. Wandering Archaic is going to add attacks to our opponent's instants and sorceries. They'll think twice about using Swords to Plowshares, or even some of their big flashy cards like extra turns and things like that. Sire of 7 Deaths, yet another payoff I haven't had a chance to play with. This is a keyword Eldrazi, so first strike, vigilance, menace, trample, reach, lifelink, and ward pay 7 life on a 7 mana, 7/7. Cityscape Leveler has always been really good. Whenever I've played it, you give your opponents power stones, but in exchange for us blowing up their stuff. Summon Bahamut, a 9/9 flyer on a 9 mana saga creature. Destroy a non-land permanent when it enters on the first 2 chapters. On the third we draw 2, and then hopefully as a finishing blow with the Mega Flare, this creature deals damage equal to the total mana value of other permanents you control to each opponent. If that was only to one opponent, I wouldn't think much of it, but it's to each opponent, so really living up to the hype of Bahamut in Final Fantasy. We're getting the Final Fantasy X version in the artwork here. But you have to imagine, with some of the really big spells and permanents that we can play here, flooding the board with rocks and equipment and planeswalkers, that this Mega Flare is going to be really big. So that could definitely be a finisher for us, even if it is really slow. Then it's still a colourless deck, so we are still going to rely on a few Eldrazi. Kozilek has Annihilator as well as draw 4 when it is cast. The Great Distortion refills our hand if we are empty-handed, and can get some counter magic on the go as well. Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger exiles 2 permanents and then can whittle away an opponent's library by exiling it. It'll do that on attacks, 20 cards at a time. And then I don't often play Blightsteel Colossus, but we want to do big flashy rampy colourless stuff here, so Blightsteel Colossus can definitely one-shot someone if they're not careful. Trample, Infect and Indestructible on an 11/11. Some awesome spells to ramp into, like I said. Rise of the Eldrazi costs a massive 12 mana, but with our commander in play that's only 6 lands. Destroy a target permanent, target player draws 4 cards, take an extra turn after this one. So we can really set ourselves up for the next turn with that. Desecrate Reality is an instant for each opponent, exile up to 1 permanent that player controls with an even mana value. And then we can reanimate an odd mana value permanent if we spend at least 3 colourless mana to cast this, which obviously we're going to. So they lose 3 things in total, we gain 1 thing. Chimil the Inner Sun is one that I play every chance I get. It keeps our stuff from being countered and we get free spells off it with the Discover. There's a little bit of Nombo stuff in here, like we wouldn't want to get into Everflowing Chalice for instance, but there's every chance that we get into something like Wandering Archaic, or the One Ring, something like that. So Chimil is going to get us free stuff, and that's all I care about. God Pharaoh's statue is something that your opponents really don't want to see. This makes every single spell that your opponents cast cost 2 more. They'll slowly be bleeded out with this as well, but it's mainly the stacks piece that we're worried about with this one. Then a one-sided Wrath, at least for 3 creatures, a Portal to Phyrexia, and we'll be able to reanimate stuff with this as well. Just cherry pick the best stuff that we see in graveyards. We've also got All Is Dust, as we mentioned previously, and Ugin can exile stuff as well, as we also mentioned. Some support cards before we go into the playtesting, so this can give all of our creatures protection from every colour, and that's going to be handy for pushing damage through, but it can also help protect us against damage-based removal like a Blasphemous Act or something like that. Null Elemental Blast can counter things like Anguished Unmaking and Assassin's Trophy. Really good removal spells like that. I'm sure there's plenty of permanents that we don't want to have hit play, so this can counter those or just straight up destroy them as well. Kozilek's Command was really underrated when it was first spoiled, but people have discovered it in some of the 60 card formats now. You can make a bunch of Eldrazi spawn to ramp with it, scry X then draw, exile a creature with mana value X or less, or exile up to X target cards from a graveyard. So a really good modal spell. You get to choose 2 of them at instant speed, so I imagine we'll use all 4 of those modes throughout all the various games that we play with this deck. Warping Whale, mainly in here to counter a sorcery. It's likely that Wraths are going to be sorceries, so this is in here for that. Eldrazi Confluence, we can choose 3, and we can choose the same mode more than once, so +3, -3 means that we can go -9 onto the toughness of a creature. We can flicker a non-land permanent, which is unusual for a colourless spell. I'm not sure. Actually, there are some ETBs that we would care about there. We could reset the Summon Bahamut if we wanted to. We've got Cityscape Leveler. That's actually on casting and attacking, so flickering that doesn't help. But Duplicant it does, so I'm not sure how much we would use. The ETB, because it's mainly cast triggers that we're looking at, but that's an option potentially. And then we can go for the Eldrazi Scion as well, so I'm thinking that this is a removal spell, and then maybe we sneak out a Scion or 2 as well. And then in most of my colourless decks now I put Liberator Rofflethopter and the Skittering Cicada as well. These just basically mean that we can play at flash speed, which can make a massive difference, especially when you've got double mana. You can just flood the board with stuff before your turn even starts. I'm not going to bore you with all of the utility lands, because it's all stuff that you know about already, like the Urzatron and lands that enter and scry, stuff like that, Strip Mine, Rogue's Passage from Blockable. I mean, you can use your imagination. It's a pretty typical colourless lands build, I think. Each one taps for colourless, of course, so that means that we get an additional mana from Ultima. I did just spot one thing there that I'll point out. Planar Nexus is every non-basic land type, which means it's all the Urza lands. So if you get this in, along with Urza's Mine, it will make Urza's Mine tap for 2 instead of 1. The Power Plant, the same thing. It'll make the Urza's Tower tap for 3, so you don't necessarily need to assemble Urzatron. You can just go and find the Planar Nexus, and it will switch those individual cards on. Anyway, let's go for a playtest, and we'll see how it fares. Speaking of the Urza lands, we get into a couple straight away, the Urza's Tower and Workshop. Let's just... I was going to play this, but there's actually nothing to do in the first few turns, so let's try again. Okay, that's looking better. We get straight into the Tower again, but we've got some ramp in the form of the Ancient Tomb, which means a turn 2 Liberator, probably the Flesh Raker first. So draw for turn, get into our wastes, let's play the Tower. Turn 2 shows us Blightsteel Colossus, so we are going for the Flesh Raker so that we can start making Eldrazi spawn, which means we go through to turn 3, we get into the Power Plant, so we might accidentally assemble Tron here. 4 mana available. We can hold up Eldritch Immunity if our opponents are worried about us generating mana with this, and we're getting this down at flash speed. So let's just assume that we have to protect it and play the Eldritch Immunity there. And then it's round to our turn. We played 2 spells, so we would have got the 2 Eldrazi spawn drawn into the Burnished Heart. So we can drop a wastes, and we could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for our commander. That would allow us to hold up 4 mana for a Burnished Heart, which I would probably do. And when we played the Ultima, it would bring back an Eldrazi spawn. When we play the Burnished Heart, it would bring back an Eldrazi spawn. So we're seeing how incredible the Glaring Fleshraker is here. So around to turn 5, we can see how much we've done here. Let's see. So we've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We can definitely afford the Blightsteel Colossus. So I don't know, I'll just throw down probably the Emergent Zone. We can surprise our opponents with Blightsteel. Maybe they'll let it down thinking that they can block with enough. And then we can surprise them with a Rogue's Passage. I wouldn't have thought they'd let down Blightsteel Colossus, but hard to say when we've no board to look at. So get down Blightsteel. Turn 6. Get down the Rogue's Passage. We can easily play the Liquimetal Torque. Probably sacrifice Burnished Heart in order to get rid of a few wastes from the library, and then we would hope that we would make the Blightsteel Colossus unblockable and take someone out here. I can't remember when this came into play actually. Was it on turn 4 or 5? Anyway, we haven't had haste, so for the past couple of turns we've been attacking him with this and dealing with our opponent's lands, maybe screwing up their colours while we do it. It is noteworthy that we can go after basics with this, so the multicoloured players are going to struggle against us, I think. Anyway, we just draw into another land, unfortunately. So we'll just get the Eye of Ugin into play. Turn 8, can we get into something different? That's something to play at least. Cityscape Leveler, blow something up at instant speed. Obviously we'd assume that our opponents would deal with Blightsteel at some point. Turn 9, that makes things really difficult for our opponents. Although by turn 9 maybe they've got the surplus mana to play around it. So let's just assume we're going empty-handed. Haven't drawn into any card draw apart from that. Let's see, just out of curiosity, what we would draw into here. So what's that? 12 mana. So we go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. Draw into these. I don't think we played a land for the turn. So now we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 mana available. So we can go for, that is 9, 10, 11, 12. So equip this first before our opponents sacrifice stuff into the Portal to Phyrexia. It's difficult for our opponents to hold up Force of Wills and an offer you can't refuse, Swords to Plowshares and things like that, because it costs 2 additional to cast them now. So a bunch of stuff gets sacrificed, this thing gets buffed and makes commander damage a lot more threatening from Ultima. Through to the next turn we've got the Hedron Archive, so let's just say we crack that for 2 cards again, and there we go into the One Ring into Ulamog. So we'd be hoping to start chaining off and doing stuff like this with all our mana a lot sooner. Obviously it depends on the luck of the draw, but all we're really trying to do here is get a rough idea of the sequencing and what we want to do in the deck. Surprisingly barely drew into any rocks in all that actually. But like I said, that just shows the potency of the Fleshraker, so hopefully it gives you a good idea of how we're going to operate Ultima. We basically just want to ramp like crazy and do all the really fun colourless stuff that breaks the backs of our opponents, so look forward to seeing that, I hope. Big thank you to the patrons for supporting me in my endeavours to create content for all of you, and I hope to see you all during the Ultima gameplay video. I'm tribalkai. Thank you for watching.